disclaimers before we get started. Setting up some props for. This may contain a lot of extra biblical material, some thinking, some embellishments of some certain things, because I don't know what happened if this was exactly the way it happened. But we will be telling the story as found in John chapter 18, verses 28 through 19, through chapter 19, verse 22. And I decided to come about this in a narrative format. So it's not going to be a structured sermon like we used to, So I ask it, if you wish to, follow along. And I ask that you take this moment of creativity and enjoy and learn something from the telling of this story. And pray for me, because hopefully we get this. This is just the first time I do this, not the last. The game was called Tabule. It was a game of skill and chance. The roll of the dice and the moving of stones caused perfect balance of planning and luck and chance. Pilate liked to keep one of these in his headquarters at all times, to hone his skills, to teach him, because it taught more than just how to play the game. He felt it helped him in strategy and politics and moving around in life in general. So he'd like to keep it to make sure that he knew. He liked to keep the board set up in his headquarters as a way to keep himself sharp. Its strategy and element and need for quick thinking helped him hone his senses and political aspirations, especially when it came to dealing with unexpected circumstances and difficult individuals. And there were none more difficult than the Jews who lived in Jerusalem. They were a stubborn people and lived what Pilate considered a complex existence. The whole community would take the same day off. Not one of them would work and would continually argue about what work actually looked like. Their religion was devoted to the worship of one deity and not account for the myriad of others that Pilate knew existed. They disagreed with the Romans, the Greeks, the Samaritans, and even themselves. They wouldn't submit unless violently forced, and even then they acted as if they were above others. They were certainly an ungovernable species, and he was sent there to govern them. He looked out over the city. There was a lot of hustle and bustle as the people were making preparations for one of their holy feasts. What was it called? Pesach, whatever it translated into Passover. It was celebrating the time when their God set them free from the slavery of Egypt. He knew the stories. He's heard them time and time again. And Pilate scoffed. A lot of good that did for them, he thought. For they certainly were not as free as they claimed to be. They were still under Roman rule, under his rule. He picked up the cup, loaded the dice, rolled, and made a move. He put the dice back in the cup and started to plan the move for his opponent. when he was interrupted by a voice. "Prefect," it was his chief aide, "you have some visitors." "Who could it be at this hour?" he asked gruffly. It was early. "It's the Sanhedrin, the ruling body of the Jews." "I know who the Sanhedrin are. Send them in." His aide stammered a moment. "They refused to come in, sir. They said it would defile them for their sacred feast. If they won't come in, then they can go home or wait." His aide stammered, I'm not sure those are options, sir. They seemed a bit worked up, and there are quite a few of them." Pilate put his hand to his head and asked, "How many?" "All of them, sir." "You don't say." That was unusual. "And apparently they have a prisoner." Pilate looked at the cup in his hand. "Tell them I'll be out in a moment." He dismissed his aide. He sighed. "So Caiaphas, it's to be you today." He stared at the board, moved some pieces, and made his way to his portico. Now Caiaphas stood in the courtyard, stewing with anger mixed with frustration. He had to keep himself calm. He couldn't let any weakness be seen. He had to get this man, Pilate, to bend to his will. This task had to be accomplished. This was, after all, an important game not to lose. He looked over at the prisoner, this man, Jesus, the one that so many people had followed, some calling him the Messiah, some calling him a prophet, claiming him as a king. All Caiaphas knew was that he was dangerous. He was going to tear Israel apart and bring the wrath of Rome and all their armies down on them all. Caiaphas had worked so hard to build a working relationship with Rome. They were at the point where Rome almost left them alone to govern themselves. This man was dangerously close to bringing it all to an end. Yet, when Caiaphas looked at Jesus of Nazareth, he didn't look dangerous. He simply stood there as if humbly accepting his fate. Regardless, Jesus made Caiaphas nervous. The prisoner lifted his eyes and met his gaze. The authority and calm that Caiaphas saw there made him even more angry, and certain that this was the right course of action. But something about that gaze troubled him, weakened his resolve slightly. Suddenly the door swung open, and the voice of Pontius Pilate echoed through the courtyard. "What is it that's so important that you come today of all days, Caiaphas?" Many of the members of the Sanhedrin were physically startled by this sudden entrance. Caiaphas, however, was expecting it as part of the spectacle. He remained calm and cool and spoke. "We have captured a dangerous criminal that needs to be dealt with, and we have brought him to you to execute judgment." "For me to execute judgment?" Pilate retorted. "You need me? What accusations do you bring against him that warrants Rome's involvement?" Many different voices spoke at once. Blasphemy, inciting rebellion, rabble-rousing, destruction of temples. He claims to be a king and the Son of God were all spoken. Caiaphas raised his hand, and the Sanhedrin calmed. "If this man was not dangerous, prefect, and doing evil, we would not have brought him to you." Pilate waved a dismissive hand. "Only some of those things are important to Rome's interest. Take him and judge him by your own laws. The crowd began mumbling and grumbling about this. Caiaphas silenced them all again. We have judged him, but we are not allowed by Roman law to put anyone to death. Who is this man that causes so much strife and deserving of death? Pilate asked with contempt. His name, Caiaphas spoke flatly, is Jesus of Nazareth. And he could tell that Pilate recognized that name. Pilate had paused for a moment and let out an exasperated sigh. Fine, I will interrogate him myself and see if he is as dangerous as you insist he is. He nodded to his guards, who took the prisoner and led him back to the Pilate's headquarters. As Pilate re-entered the headquarters, he glanced in the direction of the game board. He walked to the window and looked out. These Jews are more trouble than they are worth, and now they have brought him one of their problems, and they expected him to do something. He began to weigh the odds. If he just takes this man and executes him, then they win the power to command that almost any time they choose. Plus, this may be an innocent man according to Roman law, and that would be troublesome. The guards brought the prisoner in and stood him in the center of the room with his hands bound with ropes and chains. Pilate had heard the name Jesus of Nazareth. He knew the reputation. It seems that every person had an opinion on him, about him. Many of the people revered him. Some of his own guards spoke highly about him. Pilate's own wife even mentioned him. Pilate knew of the uneasy relationship Jesus had with the religious authority of his own people, of the so-called miracles and riots that occurred in his presence, and here he was in Pilate's headquarters. He didn't look like much of a threat. Pilate approached the game board, picked up the die. And made a move. Pilate, are you the king of the Jews? He asked. It was a simple enough question. Pilate wanted to know what this man had to say about himself. Jesus spoke. Did you say this on your own accord, or did others say it to you about me? Pilate paused, answering a question with a question. Simple tactic. Pilate was slightly impressed, if not a bit put off. He could play this game too. Am I a Jew? Am I a Jew? Your nation, your people, and their chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done? Jesus lifted his head and stared at Pilate. My kingdom is not of this world. If it were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered to the Jews. But my kingdom is not of this world. A kingdom not of this world. What kind of gibberish was that? What kind of answer was that? But he did not deny being a king. So you are a king then. Jesus spoke. You say that I am a king. I was born for this purpose, and have come into this world to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Pilate was beginning to realize that this Jesus was playing a bigger game. There's no ill will in his voice. It appeared to Pilate that Jesus was playing to lose. But was it playing as a loser? These words Jesus spoke struck a chord into him. What is truth? Pilate spoke aloud. These words hung in the air like a thick fog, consuming every part of the room. Pilate picked up the cup. placed the dice in the cup. Made another move. He rolled the dice and stared at the board. It was then that a thought occurred to him. He would use their own traditions against them. And he made a move. To say that Caiaphas was getting anxious would be an understatement. But he stood resolute and steady. He had to be. This had to happen for the good of Israel, for the good of the people, for the good of the Sanhedrin. This had to happen. The other priests began to talk amongst themselves nervously, speculating on possible outcomes. What if this fails? What can we do next? What can we do? What if he doesn't bend to our needs, our will? These questions lingered in the air and lingered in the heart of Caiaphas, eating away at his soul and mind. He could not entertain them. He could not allow himself to even think about them. This venture could not fail. Suddenly, something in the air shifted. The door opened, and Pilate once again emerged from his quarters. Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin stood straight and gave the prefect their full attention. Pilate stood authoritatively and spoke the words, "I find no guilt in this man." Everyone in the courtyard gasped simultaneously. This was not acceptable. All at once, everyone clamored to be heard, grumbling, trying to get their thoughts across. Pilate raised his hand and silenced the crowd. "However, there is a custom of yours that I will honor today. We have traditionally released a prisoner on the day of your Passover. I will give you an option. We have the King of the Jews, this Jesus of Nazareth, or the man, Barabbas." Caiaphas saw this for what it was, a ploy to get out of doing what needed to be done. Barabbas was a man who robbed, stole, murdered. He not only murdered Romans, but Jews and people from many other cultures. To allow him to be released would go against the laws and commandments and ideologies from every aspect of their beliefs, of every aspect of the religion of God. Pilate found someone who deserved death and punishment to replace somebody he deemed did not. This was a test. The murmuring swelled. Every priest knew that Barabbas was getting what he deserved, but they also knew Jesus of Nazareth needed to go. Caiaphas silenced the murmuring and stood straight and said, "Give us Barabbas." And suddenly he felt something crack in his soul. Pilate asked, "Are you certain?" Every member of the Sanhedrin stared at Caiaphas. "Yes," he said. "Do not release this man, but give us Barabbas." With those words, the member of the Sanhedrin echoed, "Give us Barabbas," until it became chanted again and again, "Give us Barabbas, give us Barabbas, give us Barabbas." Pilate silenced the crowd. "Very well," he said, and then he turned his attention to the guards and commanded, "You heard the people. Release the prisoner Barabbas and have this Jesus flogged and beaten." The soldiers carried out their orders, and they almost enjoyed it. Barabbas, much to his own surprise, was released almost immediately. As for Jesus of Nazareth, he was dragged to another courtyard and was strapped to a pole. The guards ripped off his clothes, took a cat of nine tails, and whipped him and beat him and slashed him. They fashioned a crown out of some thorn bushes and placed it on Jesus' head as a mockery of a king who could not afford his own crown. They mocked him by saying, "Hail to the King of the Jews! Hail to the King of the Jews!" And after they were done beating him and torturing him, they placed a purple cloth on his back as a robe. Purple, the color of royalty. By the time that they were done, it was difficult to see the regal man that Pilate first met. The strong, defiant one that angered Caiaphas was so almost gone. Left in a shadow was a sickly, bleeding, beaten man. Pilate brought Jesus before the crowd and presented him. Pilate walked out to the Sanhedrin. He thought smugly that this would surely satisfy them. He addressed the crowd, "I am bringing him out to you. I find no guilt in him. Behold the man." Jesus stood there in shambles, blood soaking through the purple robe that was callously draped around him, looking pitiful. The crown of thorns sitting on his head as a mockery to all things kingly. Caiaphas stared in disgust. The Romans were vicious and cruel in their torture. The Sanhedrin and the crowd that gathered cried out in loud voices, "Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate, not wanting to have any more blood on his hands, and satisfied that he had completed the task set before him, threw it back at them and said, "Take him yourself and crucify him. I find no guilt in this man." Not wanting to have any, both Pilate and Caiaphas knew that the other man both Pilate and Caiaphas knew that the other man knew that this was impossible. They both wanted something the other was unwilling to give. Caiaphas wanted this problem resolved. Pilate wanted this not to be his problem. The Sanhedrin needed to give something, and something big, for what they were asking. Someone spoke up. "We have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die because he made himself to be the Son of God." This move rattled Pilate just a little bit. He knew enough about his own religion that sons of gods were problematic, and strange things happen to people who mess around with them. He also knew that these Jews were bloodthirsty and would not be satisfied with anything other than death. He pulled Jesus into his headquarters and frantically asked, "Where are you from exactly?" He wanted to know. He needed to know. If anything went forward, he needed an answer to that question. If Jesus was the Son of God, then this death has more ramifications than he ever dreamed. But Jesus of Nazareth remained silent. Pilate was angered at this silence. "How dare you stay silent and not answer my questions? Do you not know that I have the authority to have you killed, or with a snap of my fingers I can set you free?" Jesus looked at him solemnly and spoke with such power and peace in his voice that Pilate became a little even more disturbed. "You have no authority over me unless it was given to you from above. The ones who gave me to you are guilty of a greater sin." Pilate returned to the crowd. He proclaimed adamantly that he would not and could not and should not kill this man. He had done enough to this guiltless man. The Sanhedrin were panicking. The plan was almost falling apart. This Jesus could possibly escape execution and cause no end of strife for Israel, the Sanhedrin, and the people. The realization that if he did not get crucified, what retaliation could they expect? Caiaphas felt the cracks of his soul become longer and wider. The compromise and confusion adding to the mess in his mind and his spirit. Suddenly, something occurred to him. He spoke in a loud, clear, calm voice that rose above the entire crowd. "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who sets himself to be king opposes Caesar. The loud voices lowered to whispers. Then slowly the entire building became quiet. The cracks in Caiaphas' soul widened. Pilate, frozen in place, stared in disbelief. Was this Jew challenging his loyalty to Rome? Is this the move the priest was willing to make, threatening him with the retaliation from Caesar himself? Could this be possible? The air was heavy and fragile. The next few moments would change everything. Pilate slowly turned and summoned his guards to grab the broken body of Jesus of Nazareth and place him on the edge of the stage. Then Pilate made his way to the stone pavement, the seat of judgment. He sat regally on the throne and pointed to Jesus of Nazareth, and he said, "Behold, your king." Then he spoke, "Shall I crucify your king?" Somewhere from the crowd of the Sanhedrin, a voice cried out, "We have no king but Caesar." Caiaphas' heart stopped beating in that moment. The cracks grew. Everything they believed, everything that they were as a people was being challenged and changed in that sentence. And is that what it was going to take? Pilate leaned forward in his seat and said, "What did you say?" "We have no king but Caesar." It shocked Caiaphas to hear those words coming out of his own mouth. What had he just said? The cracks in his soul almost broke him, yet he stood there stoically. A wry, satisfied smile came across Pilate's face. A move he wasn't expecting. Words he had been wanting to hear in some form or another were finally spoken. A victory. Even if they didn't mean it, the words had been spoken. He locked eyes with Caiaphas. "Guards," he called. "Take this man," pointing to Jesus of Nazareth, "to be crucified." Jesus of Nazareth was taken away and led to the place of the skull to be crucified. Pilate took some wood and painted a sign. He wrote the judgment in Greek, Aramaic, and Latin, words that hung like the weight of a millstone in the heart of Caiaphas. It read, "The King of the Jews." The chief priest pleaded him to change it, to say that he claimed to be the King of the Jews. Pilate reflected to himself. He thought, "This is not a man I'm crucifying. This is an idea." But he only spoke the words, "What I have written, I have written." This narrative incorporates a lot of things. The church thinks Pilate was a weak man. They considered him because he lost and he gave in to the Jews. But did he really? Yes, he crucified the person that they wanted to crucify. But they gave up so much more. They surrendered an entire ideology in the words, "We have no king but Caesar." Because their thinking, their thoughts were that we have no king but God. God is our king. David is our king. And they just threw it all away. And when you think about when we think the Easter story, when we think the Passion of Christ, we see that I think we've softened it in places that we shouldn't be soft. We don't understand that this was more than this was a huge political fight for control. And we know the outcome is, yes, Jesus got crucified. and the game was lost. 3 days later, the victory was won. Take what you can out of this story, out of this tale. Understand what it takes to what they gave up to get what they want. What do you give up to get what you want? And what is God asking for you in your life? I'll let today sit with you. I'm going to pray and we're going to continue. Father God, thank you for this creative venture that I ventured on. Lord God, I thank you for this story and all the ramifications that it has. Lord, I pray for the people in this room that we will know where to stand. We will know what you've done for us. And we will understand a little bit more about this story and the stuff that you had to go through. I love you, Jesus. In your name. Amen.